Happy Arbor Day.
Counter-Strike is a tried and true game, having many official versions and countless sequels, but none of these are quite like Counter-Strike Neo, a version of Counter-Strike so obscure that it was practically erased from existence, hidden away in Japanese arcades, built with Valve's blessing, featuring futuristic characters, brand new lore, and maps that don't exist anywhere else. A game that's now nothing more than a faint memory in Counter-Strike history, lost to time. In this video, I'm going to be covering the history of the game, what made it so special and unique, and what ultimately happened to it. So let's start from the beginning. The year was 2000.
Indeed.
Bandai Namco, yes, that Bandai Namco, led by Tetsu Tsuchiya, wanted to replicate the success of Counter-Strike by bringing it to Japan. The only issue was most of Japan didn't care much for competitive shooters like Counter-Strike. So Tetsu and his team devised a plan. What if instead of hoping people would suddenly download Counter-Strike at internet cafes and learn it, they made a unique and catered version just for Japan at arcades, because people go to arcades to play video games. Tetsu also decided against creating a brand new title to compete with Counter-Strike, mainly because of budget constraints. Instead, he chose to work with Counter-Strike because of its already rising popularity at the time. In the meantime, Namco set up an arcade called Lead Zone in the heart of Tokyo, Japan. This store was meant to be the foreground of Namco's experimental titles, which didn't only include Counter-Strike. They were actually originally meant for more MMORPG type games, which is why they aren't your typical arcade machines. Instead, being a Linux-based computer with set peripherals that you couldn't change and had loud-ass speakers. But thankfully, you could plug in headphones if you asked the staff nicely. As time went on though, Namco really anchored onto the idea of Counter-Strike, which started their first rounds of production on the style and story of the game. Instead of the typical terrorists versus counter-terrorists, they decided to replace them with two new factions. The CT side is called Neo, and the T side is called CSF. The story for CS Neo is pretty interesting as well. Let me try to summarize it real fast. In this world, or more like the future, an evil corporation named Neo was trying to set up a space station to the moon to get resources from space much easier. However, this didn't end up working. Not because Neo messed something up, but instead a world-changing disaster that was an asteroid colliding with the moon.
Oh no!
This asteroid...
Why is it always the moon? They always break the moon. Always the moon.
Completely destroyed the moon and sent debris from it straight down to Earth. The explosion and debris mainly affected areas near the Gulf of Mexico, but it also managed to shift the Earth's axis. While the rest of the world was in chaos, Neo saw an opportunity. That resource-rich asteroid could help aid their efforts at becoming a world superpower. And with the rest of the world struggling, it seemed even more possible. The resources from the asteroid helped Neo advance technology to crazy levels, which is why the Neo team in the game are so futuristic looking. To combat Neo's monopoly and maintain order in a drastically changed world, the few remaining countries organized their police forces and militaries to form the CSF. I don't know about you, but I wish normal Counter-Strike had a story this crazy. Once the character and stories were finalized, it was time to get permission from Valve themselves, and probably some of their help. After faxing back and forth for a while,
Hello, this is Valve from Valve. So you want to create a Counter-Strike for Japanese arcades, huh? Please explain, because you can play Counter-Strike on PC, maybe?
Valve responded slowly and didn't exactly make things clear, so Tetsu and his team did the only thing they could. They packed their bags and flew all the way to Valve's headquarters in Seattle. When they explained their plans, Valve was surprisingly interested in helping, with none other than Gabe Newell himself signing the contract. Namco
also, I like that.
Was surprisingly interested in helping, with none other than Gabe Newell.
I like that Gabe Newell is he's a it's a Spheal from Pokemon
himself signing the contract. Namco then got on to work on the first iteration of the game, which was released in 2003. This first version was essentially a heavily modified Counter-Strike 1.6, and has since become completely lost to time, practically a piece of lost media. In fact, this video here shows the only known gameplay found of it, thanks to Marlanka, who found it and has been a huge help in making this video. Thankfully, there's still some images of the game that were posted to the original, now defunct website. It really does look a lot more like CS 1.6, with vastly different character models compared to the second, more polished version. That second version was released in 2005, 2 years after the first, and this is where things get even more interesting. This version used Counter-Strike source models straight from Valve, using the source weapon models and graphics, even though it was still running on the Gold source engine, more specifically a heavily modified version of Counter-Strike Condition Zero. This puts the game in such a weird middle ground between Gold source and source that I can't help but point it out. You'd go through missions that look like they're from source, but the sound effects are straight out of Half-Life 1. As I mentioned before,
those toilet sounds from Half-Life 1. Awesome.
The second version was much more polished, likely because Namco saw how successful the first experimental version was in 2003. But along with that polish came some changes. The more ambitious and downright bizarre looking characters from the original version were swapped out for more boobalicious and basic ones, although it still did have some really cool character designs.
Word.
It was also around this time that Namco started releasing their Flash manga, Counter-Strike White Memories.
Ooh. Flash manga. Counter-Strike anime opening? Oh, hell yeah! Do you remember my promise? Wow. It's like Fate State. Oh, look at that crusty looking.
That's a whole other topic for another video. Counter-Strike Neo at the time was becoming more and more successful, but why did it do so well? Well, you see, the main focus of the game was actually teaching people how to play Counter-Strike. It was super easy for someone to walk in for the first time, pay 300 yen for 20 minutes, and learn the pretty in-depth tutorials. You'd probably have someone next to you eager to help as well. Once you got used to the game and changed up your settings, you could also buy a player card that would save all of your information on it. So all you had to do next time was scan the card and you're in. This arcade system for Counter-Strike works so well that Neo was actually a lot of people's first FPS games ever played, and it definitely left an impact on Japanese gamers at the time. Okay, enough about the backstory for now. How about I show you just how different this game really was from the other Counter-Strikes we know and love. Aside from the main defuse mode we're so used to seeing, this
look at the
video. Now, let's get back to the gameplay. Aside from the main defuse,
look at that cool bunny. This bunny looks so cool. Look, he's got the sunglasses. That makes him cool.
Mode we're so used to seeing, this game also came with a mission mode that was essentially 3 scenarios. One where you had to fight through a sea of pre-placed enemies and defuse a bomb, another where you had to plant a bomb, and another where you have to plant the bomb and defend it and also survive. That one was definitely the hardest one, but thankfully I did have Deslance's help. The times you get on these missions could also be compared to the rest of the arcade, the fastest times presumably being at the top of the board. Now how about the typical defuse mode? Well, not too surprisingly, version 2 had the exact weapon loadout from Counter-Strike Source. A very funny combination seeing these futuristic cyborg characters that even had bionic ponytails running around with a UMP or op. Feels like they should have some laser guns or something. Although going through the game files, we can see some references to other items that didn't make it into the game, like the Law, Flare, Gas Mask, Molotov, Shield, and an M60. Some of this could be placeholders from version 1 as well. The gameplay itself though was basically the same as other Counter-Strikes. No real notable changes to the weapons, the bomb, or even health and armor other than the pictures for them. Although the jumping was replaced with a crouch jump, which was most likely for the newbies. And yes, you could be hot, but that crouch jump did make it a bit harder. The second version I'm showing here also only had a defuse game mode. Well, sort of. There were actually event maps that'd be hosted every once in a while for Neo, which are pretty hard to get some info on. But there is still one map in the game files called E17 that was the assassination game mode, so really the only map in the version 2 game that has a hostage per se. The first Lost version of the game was the one that had a lot more of the actual CS_ hostage maps, which is kind of sad to see that it was gone from the second version of the game.
I mean, I guess that does make sense, because, who the fuck plays, hostage maps? Unless you're playing Office.
I think this hijacked boat map would have been really cool to see. Having the Neo team spawn from a helicopter to save the hostage. In my opinion, this has to be one of the most unique designed Counter-Strike games. With it being Japanese instead of the usual American-made Counter-Strike, they of course took their own creative liberties, especially when you compare it to the usual terrorist versus counter-terrorist games. There isn't any blood in the game, anime characters running around, and I also found one of the developers' adorable cats in the
That's awesome! I love that this stuff where the developers just hide their cats in the game
files as a placeholder. So this is definitely the cutest Counter-Strike. The maps though were probably the most uniquely designed aspect of the game. These were not your typical Dust 2 and Nuke maps. They were something completely different, and I'm not just talking about the aesthetics, even though I actually really like the look of them. There's this one map they had to go into an ancient pyramid that has a bomb site that looks like this. I have no idea how to explain it, but it's just cool.
That's crazy.
Now, the maps definitely bring back a lot from the Frutiger Arrow era, which is a very interesting style to see in a Counter-Strike game. You can tell the developers put a lot of time and effort into the tiny details on these maps, especially the fact that they would make whole event maps that they knew would be basically deleted after its time was up. Thankfully, a lot of these event maps are still sitting in the game files, and most of them are very peculiar. This one has vehicles on it where I think you race to the end of the map. This one is a KZ type map for New Year's. This one's Death Run, I think, and just so many more that I have no clue what they're for. I'm getting a bit carried away by the event maps though. The official map layouts is where the game really shines. They definitely weren't afraid of stepping out of the typical CS map design box, and I have to give them some credit. In fact, they actually designed each map to have a specific gimmick to them. Downtown was this insanely vertical map that even let you jump across these signs, but they would damage you over time. The Force map has this little grinder thing on B side that will just kill you.
The Pulper. I love maps with freaking meat grinders. I love meat grinder maps like that. They're fun. They're fun.
Though I don't know how useful this would really be. And a lot of maps just had these weird unconventional designs, like this giant sewer that you could swim through and traverse the map. There are just so many interesting things about these maps that I think would be really cool.
Oh, I see. That's a cabot. That's a cabot.
Cool to see played out. Because of that reason, I think the game actually had a pretty decent pro scene, but it was definitely niche. Although it was popular enough to warrant its own events and name for it, the Clan Wars. This was the pro scene of Counter-Strike Neo, basically a giant LAN party, where most likely teams of friends would compete, or maybe teams of the best players in the town. I'm not really sure what the prizes were, but I know that the winners managed to get their own graffitis on the maps that they won on, which is pretty sick. Other than that, the winners might have gotten their own cosmetics. Oh yeah, cosmetics. This game made sure to have plenty of those. The cosmetics in this game only affected the actual player models instead of the gun skins like we're so used to seeing nowadays. You of course had to unlock all of them other than just a basic male and female player model that you start with, but there were some very interesting models in the files that I assume are maybe admin skins or just for some special people. The skins themselves would also change colors the higher your level got, which is very cool to me. You could also place accessories onto the player models you had, and most accessories had to be unlocked for missions or other events. Okay, I think that's enough about the gameplay. What actually ended up happening to the game?
Yeah, but what happened?
Sadly, as more and more people got their own personal computers and the arcade scene faded, Neo was destined to fade away with it. The game did manage to survive for a while thanks to a cult following, with friends meeting up at Lead Zone and other arcades to play it, which is why it actually took until November 30th, 2007 for the first Lead Zone store to close in Kyoto, Japan. A farewell message saying that it had completed its role as an experimental store. Then the next store closed on April 23rd, 2008. This time it was the final Lead Zone store to close. And sadly, it had been that very first one that I mentioned in the beginning that was in Tokyo, Japan. Lead Zone themselves being lost to time, completely shut down once that last store closed. You would be hard pressed to find any information on Lead Zone nowadays that doesn't involve an internet archive. Thankfully, there were some other arcades other than Lead Zone that still hosted these Neo arcade machines. But finally, on February 1st, 2010, support for those machines would end as well, with the servers being taken offline, which pretty much affected the entire game. The only way to still play the game is either offline on those limited and most likely long gone arcade machines, or using an emulator for a second version of the game that was actually leaked not too long ago. csneo.net has a decent tutorial for it. I made sure to search far and wide to see if anyone actually still has these machines.
Oh, I love that.
In their possessions,
that's why I love
but with
Goldec.
most forums being completely in Japanese, it was very hard to search for it. Of course, I couldn't find it even after searching the depths of the internet, so I think it's safe to say that this game is gone and very much lost. A cool relic to be left behind in the Counter-Strike Museum. It's also clear that this game left a lasting impact on those who actually got to experience it, and while its ending was sad, there was really no other way it could have gone.
But at least you can play regular Counter-Strike or Valorant. You know what? I think most Japanese players prefer Valorant anyway. I know a certain cute demon girl does. Dochi dochi.